You'd think that the first $1 billion of siphoned off funds would be sufficient for any conceivable need or requirement he might have, personal or political. But it was like it kept feeding on itself, and there seemed to be no limit to his avarice or to his willingness to permit his cronies to enrich themselves at the expense of the Filipino people. At one point I coined the phrase kleptocracy to characterize the peculiar form of government that the Marcoses had established.
In the meantime, the Philippines, the brightest star in Southeast Asia, was slowly waning under this, economically waning, and the other countries were coming up, and that was in part a result of the corruption.
In 1972, Mr. Marcos was already 7 years in office. He had 1 year to go. He was toying with the idea of fielding Imelda, but Imelda showed very poor in the polls. So what did Mr. Marcos do? Change the Constitution.
On the floor of the Senate, Ninoy charged that Marcos was transforming democratic society into a garrison state. He famously predicted that Marcos was planning to impose martial law to extend himself in power beyond the constitutional limit of 8 years.
The United States, with enormous influence over its one-time colony, by now in the person of President Richard M. Nixon, closed its eyes.
And then, on September 23, midnight, Mr. Marcos went on television and said, "I, Ferdinand Marcos, acting as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, I now declare martial law and shall administer this country alone." On that day, democracy died.
The first to be arrested was NINOY Aquino, of course, while he was having a Senate hearing at Manila Hilton, I think.
An army truck delivered all of his stuff, clothes, everything, including and up to a toothbrush. And my mother said, "Why are you returning his toothbrush?" And the female soldier said, "He has no more need of it."
Martial law is law of the gun. He who has the gun is the law.
In jail, Aquino initially was surrounded by friends from the Liberal Party and independent-minded journalists. But one by one, his friends were let out or moved to new cells. Aquino was left to the one thing he seemed to fear: being alone.
For 7 years, I was not allowed to see the moon and the stars. I would walk and walk and walk across my room, just a room of about 4 meters by 5 meters, hoping that I'll get tired. And then when I get tired, I will fall asleep, knowing that tomorrow will be the same. I felt that I already earned my peace. I have done my best. I waited for 7 years and 7 months, and the Filipino people did not react. And they would even give me the impression that they love their chain and their slavery. What can one man do if the Filipino people love their slavery? If the Filipino people have lost their voice and would not say no to a tyrant, what can one man do? I have no army, I have no following, I have no money, I only have my indomitable spirit.
Aquino wrote attacks on martial law that were smuggled out and published internationally. The first public resistance to the abandonment of constitutional government. He was thrown into solitary confinement.
The greatest punishment that was given to him was not being in jail, but because they took him away from people. He just loved people. He glows when he talks to anybody, to you or to me or to the guards. And so what happened when they put him in isolation and they would not allow visitors? I think that was when it really hit him home.
When I saw him in Fort Magsaysay, he had to hold on to his pants, no? Because they literally were falling off him.
With the light bulb, naked light bulb shining the whole night, 24 hours. He didn't know what time it was. He didn't know if it's day or night. And he was there for days in that situation. So he had nothing but prayer.
Within the timeless cave of Ninoy's cell, Jesus became a live human being. He berated Aquino for his self-pity. He told Aquino that with political success he had become more and more like Marcos. In the depths of my desolation, he stood me face to face with myself and forced me to look at my emptiness and nothingness.
And that Fort Magsaysay, I think, was the turning point. From an ambitious politician to somebody committed to doing God's work for the people, no?
I have read Mahatma Gandhi in prison. And this frail man, this man of almost 60 years old, barely 96 pounds, fought the entire British Empire and caused that empire to collapse. Why? Because he had an indomitable spirit. He had a moral spirit. And as long as man will refuse to be defeated, you are never defeated.
Marcos tried anew to silence Aquino with trumped-up charges, a military tribunal, and the threat of death. His lawyers came often to defend him, but Aquino dismissed the tribunal as a farce. He refused to participate. He remained defiant, arguing, to a citizen of democracy, to protest is not only a right, it is a duty.
Never did he show that his spirit was low. That was remarkable. At all times, he showed the vibrancy of a leader.
He was sentenced to death before a firing squad. He responded with a hunger strike. One of his priests told him that he was acting cowardly, that it would be more courageous to live. On the 40th day, his body a shadow, Aquino relented. He battled back.
He had been changed by his experiences, and his soul had been changed, and his mission was changed, and his way of life was changed.
The American Pat Darien was the human rights representative of the new American president, Jimmy Carter. Visiting Manila, she demanded that Marcos allow her to see Aquino.
I said, could you just explain how it is that you have such bad human rights policies? And he said, well, it's really out of his hands, he said, pointing around the table. I said, are these all government officials? He said, well, no, are Imelda's people. They are in charge of everything. They tell Imelda what they want, and Imelda tells them what she wants. And I said, well, you're the president. Why don't you do that? He said, they'll kill me.
Late one night, she was abruptly taken from a dinner party to Fort Bonifacio prison.
I said, I don't want you to be punished in some way for this discussion that you didn't even know about. And he said, I will say anything I wish to say. There's nothing left that they can do. And he told about how the people were suffering, how the Marcoses were stealing money. Everybody was expected to pay homage to them. He thought that Imelda was the one that really did the trick. Felt that he was too dangerous, that he was a rival.
The imprisoned Aquino had become an international symbol of democratic opposition to dictatorship. Through Cory, he reached out to South Korea's Kim Dae-jung, who was imprisoned under similar circumstances. Dear Mrs. Kim Dae-jung, I share your sufferings. Please tell your husband that we, the Aquinos from the Philippines, think of him and remember him in our prayers. I pray that God will continue to help us and eventually guide us to better times. When the wheel of fortune finally turns in our favor, I look joyfully to meeting you and knowing you better. Sincerely, Cory Aquino.
Under pressure from the U.S., Marcos attempted in 1978 to legitimize his rule by staging an election. Aquino was allowed to run from prison, reappearing briefly like a phantom on the public stage. At a highly controlled meeting with the press, Aquino was trim, fit, and well-groomed.
After 5 years, Mr. Marcos says, I am going to call an interim batasan. This is an opportunity that we should not lose. For 45 days, at least we can campaign and hopefully elect some of our men to the IBP. The parliament, to be a real parliament, must need genuine opposition. Not a pseudo-opposition, not an opposition of the majority party, but a real, committed, genuine opposition.
He threw constraint to the wind.
We would like Mr. Marcos to allow the IBP to investigate the Westinghouse Dicini deal. Why was Mr. Dicini given not only commission as Curtis, commission as Asia Industries, and then on top of that, Mr. Dicini was given exclusive subcontract for all the civil works, and on top of that, a very unknown insurance company of Mr. Dicini got a whooping underwriting policy of $648 million for the entire project.
Aquino was allowed out of prison only once, for a television broadcast in which he famously defended himself from hostile questioners and continued his attack on martial law. Through intermediaries, he organized a slate of 21 candidates to run with him for Congress, mostly from Metro Manila.
Lakas ng Bayan, Power of the People. That name Ninoy gave to the party that was challenging Marcos in the Metro Manila area, Lakas ng Bayan.
They set up 6 rallies for the night. And the first one was in Parañaque. That's a little outside north of Manila. And so we got there, the stage was set, the speakers were on, and when the candidates started to speak, there were exactly 12 people and 6 dogs.
One of the candidates said, "A whisper is louder than a shout. Whisper to your family. Whisper to your friends. Vote straight Laban." The trickle became a crowd, the crowd a throng. The symbol of resistance, the sign of the L, came into widespread use.
It represents the word Laban, which in English means fight. When you do something like this, that means you're ready to fight for what you believe in.
The night before the election, April the 6th, activated by the chain letter that passed underground from trusted friend to trusted friend, running through the night, the people of Manila produced a great barrage of noise. Alejandro Roses, a Laban candidate, said noise was the first manifestation of people power.